Okay, in Module 4, Lesson 32, we're going to be able to interpret and evaluate numerical expressions, including the language of scaling and fraction division. We're basically going back to PEMDAS for a little bit, and that's good because we need a little practice on it anyway. The standard is OA12, write simple expressions that record calculations with numbers and interpret numerical expressions without evaluating them. Now, we are going to evaluate them also because I think we need some practice with that. All right, let's start with this first one. And it says twice the sum of 3/5 and 1/2. So let me get my pen here. Come on, turn on. There we go. All right. So first off, it says twice the sum. So I know the sum being 3/5 plus 1/2. This is twice the sum, so I know that's 2 times that. So now I can make this easier on myself, and I know I can do this is 3/5 plus 1/2. So I can add 3/5 plus 1/2 to make that easier. So when I rewrite this now, I know 10 is the common denominator. And it'd be 3 times 2 would be 6, plus 5 times 1 would be 5, plus 1. And now that's going to give us 2 times. This is 11/10 plus 1. And we know 11/10 is actually going to be 1 1/10 plus 1. So now we have 2 times 2 1/10. Now I can rewrite this 2 times 2 1/10 to equal 2 times 2 plus 2 times 1/10. Make it easier. Now that's going to give us 4 plus 2 times 1/10 will give us 2/10. So our answer would be 4 2/10. Now, we've been discussing in class how to make sure we have reduced fractions, okay? Now, first thing we ask, are they both even? Yes, so that means they're divisible by 2. So 2 times 1 on top and 2 times 5 on the bottom. Now we have 4 1/5 would be our final answer. Our next one says half the sum of 3/5 and 1/2. Well, once again, we got 3/5 plus 1 1/2 because that's the sum, but it says half the sum. So I could either divide it by 2, or I could go 3/5 plus 1 1/2 and multiply that by 1/2. I think it's easier to multiply by the fraction, so that's what I would take. Now, once again, we could rewrite this to 3/5 plus 1/2 plus 1 times 1/2, which then when we add these two fractions, we know as common denominator, 5 times 2 is going to give us 10. And then we'd have 3 times 2 would be 6, plus 5 times 1 would be 5, plus 1 times 1/2, which is, again, we've got 11/10 plus 1 times 1/2, which just becomes 1 1/10 plus 1 times 1/2, which now we have 2 1/10 times 1/2. So I like to use distributive property, so I'm going to take 2 times 1/2, and then I'm going to add that to 1/10 times 1/2, because we're multiplying both by half. Well, this one ends up being 2 over 2 plus 1/20, which equals 1 1/20. Next one, the difference between 3/4 and 1/2 divided by 3. Well, difference tells us we need a parenthesis, and when difference between 3/4 and 1/2 divided by 3. Divided by 3, so it has to be on the right side. First thing we look to see, can I turn one into the other? Yes, I can turn 1/2 into 4ths by multiplying by 2. So 2 times 1 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, so I end up with 2/4 divided by 3. Now when we subtract, we end up with 1/4 divided by 3. Now we're going to do our flip, skip, and multiply. So I'm skipping my quarter. I'm going to flip this 3, so instead of be 3 over 1, it's going to be 1 over 3, and I'm going to multiply. Ends up being 1/12 was our final answer. Our next one is 2/5 times 1/2 minus, and this is 4/10 as a decimal, but I'm going to write it as a fraction, 4/10. And that gives us a lot of leeway right away. Now we got 2/5 times, and I can turn the 1/2 into tenths by multiplying by 5, and I end up with 5/10 minus 4/10. Now I got 2/5 times 1/10, which gives us 2/50. Now, once again, they're both even, so I know 2 times 1 and 2 times 25. So our answer would be 1/25. Okay, so let's change it to a word first. So we can see we have parentheses with an addition, so it's going to be sum of 3/4 and 1 and 25/100 divided by 1/3. So let's go ahead and work it out. We got 3/4 plus 1 and 25/100 divided by 1/3. Now, first thing I'm going to do is turn it into a fraction. And I know 1 and 25/100, so I can put 125/100 divided by 1/3. Now, I need to make these denominators the same. So I know that I can turn 4 into 100 by multiplying by 25. So 3/4 times 25 over 25 would give me 75/100. So now I have 75/100 plus 125/100, which is going to give me, that's going to be 197/100. So now I got 197/100 divided by 1/3. Well, I know what we're going to do. We're going to go 197 over 100. We're going to multiply that by 3 over 1. So I've got 197 times 3. 7 times 3 is 21. 9 times 3 is 27, and 2 is 29. 3 times 1 is 3, and 2 is 5. So I got 591/100. Well, I know 100 would go into 591 5 times, and I got 91/100. So our answer would be 5 and 91/100. Okay, let's start by changing it to words, and I'm going to start with the parentheses. It says the quotient of 2 and 1/5 times 3/10. So let's start with 2 divided by 1/5 times 3/10. I'm going to change it to a fraction, 2 over 1 divided by 1/5 times 3/10. I'm going to skip, flip, and multiply. 2 over 1 times 5 over 1 times 3/10, which gives us 10 over 1 times 3/10, which gives me 30/10, which equals 3. All right. So you got to remember PEMDAS. Okay, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, left and right, addition, subtraction. If you go inside a set of parentheses and there are two operations, you have to do the order of operations. You would not subtract. Let's make this so it, if that was 2 times 4 minus 3, you couldn't subtract 3 from 4 first and multiply, because inside the parentheses you have to go back to PEMDAS, and you would end up doing multiplication first. So make sure you follow PEMDAS.